ASCD, and it has the same exact questions. And this is 10 years later. So these questions haven't changed. So here's the questions. The 5 questions for the offender. So the person that, that was doing the bullying or started the fight or whatever it was.
Right.
First of all, what happened? Number 2, what were you thinking about at the time? 3, what have you thought about since? 4, who's been affected by what you've done and in what ways? And then the last question, what do you think you might need to do to make things right?
Love it.
And I always feel it's very important to first have those questions in private with that student, because you want to make sure that they're willing to speak to them, and sometimes it takes a little bit more discussion and guiding for them to get to that point where they understand they need to kind of say this to that person. But then you ask these questions to them in front of the person that was affected, the victim, and then questions for the victim. And it's very important that the offender's in the room when you're asking the victim these questions, because a lot of times the offenders, don't really put themselves into the shoes, of the victim. They don't have empathy. And that's a big part of the problem with all of this, I feel, is that word empathy. And I always talked about that with kids when I was counseling them as a principal, whether it was fighting or arguments, or he bumped into me in the hallway, he took my bag of chips, whatever it might have been.
Right.
So the questions for the victim, there's 4 of them. And it's, what did you think when you realized what had happened? A lot of times kids might say, well, I was surprised, or I was sad, or it made me think of something that happened to me at home earlier in the day, and it just really made me mad. And the offender might be like, oh, I didn't know, your sister hit you before you left for school. Right. Yeah. And I was already mad,
Yeah.
And then this happened. Right. So it gives them a little bit of perspective, right, of the other person's
building some empathy.
What effect has this incident had on you and others? They might say, it made my parents upset that I had to go home and say I got picked on, or something happened. And again, the offender can kind of hear from the victim's perspective what's going on without the blame part of it. Because a lot of times it's like, well, what did you do? And why did you do that? And, look what this made him feel, and need to let the kids talk as much as possible. Question 3, what has been the hardest thing for you? So since, and it might be, well, I have trouble trusting him now, because every time he comes by my desk, I feel like I got to cover my food so he doesn't take my snacks or whatever.
Right.
Look at what you're doing here. Like, should he have to feel that way, or she have to feel that way? Because so it really helps generate some discussion. And then 4, what do you think needs to happen to make things right? And a lot of times this is a huge question, because the kid might say, I just want an apology, or I just don't want it to happen again. Like, I don't even want an apology. I really just want to move on. And then it lets both parties lay that bag of bricks down and move on, from that. Because what I found in the conflict resolution and things that I've done with kids is that whenever they left my office, I wanted to make sure that whatever was going on, that we had laid it down and we had put it to rest and put it to bed and moved on with our lives. Because, we're going back to class together. You're going to go back. Kids are going to ask you, wow, he pushed you. What happened? And you need to be able to say, hey, we're done with it. It's over. Like, we're not, I used to tell the kids too, hey, if you go back to class and some kids are asking you about it, you just tell me, because I'll call those kids in my office and tell them to leave it alone,
Right.
And then
it's been resolved.
We resolved it. It was between us. It doesn't need, a lot of times that's what happens. Fires get reignited because other people are throwing gasoline on it from the outside.
Right.
And, reigniting it. And I always tell the kids, like, when you go back, other kids, they might want to see you put on a show. They want to get their popcorn and they want to watch you go at it, because it's a show for them. I said, don't give them that show,
Right.
So, that was the main focus, was really having the kids leave and having those questions. Like, and I've had it before where I just tried to talk about it with kids. And then I really made it a point sometimes to just straight up ask these questions word for word. And when I did this, always ended better.
Now,
I was like, Dave, stick to the script. Like, don't try to go off script. Just ask these questions. Make sure you ask them. Right. So to me, that's huge. And we preach that with our administrators and our staff, and we still do. And especially this year, once I got these things. And it really lets them know that, feelings and emotions are magical, and they can really change things in a profound way. Words are very important. And that's where this whole restorative practices and, conflict resolution, it's all about words and how we use them and how we learn to use them. And that's a big thing we got to teach our kids, because there's a lot of conflict in our world. And, from politics to preschool and
Yeah.
simple things such as conflict resolution, restorative practices, discussion is what's needed. So the more we build these up with kids, maybe the better our world will be.